Okay, we are going to get started. Welcome, everybody, to this webinar, Fundamentals for Distance Learning in the Arts. My name is not Academic Standard, so that's how it shows up because of the count. My name is Alina Campana. I'm the art specialist at MDE. And so glad that you could carve out a little bit of time on your Friday afternoon for this. Um, so Um, just a little bit of webinar housekeeping. Thanks for being here. If you would, please keep yourself muted. There's going to be a few different interactive portions. And I think we're a small enough group today. I'm so glad you were able to get notification of this. The notification went out a little late, so I'm glad you're here. We have a small enough group that we can probably unmute ourselves for a conversation, or you can use the chat feature for that interactive portions. If you have questions, you can use the chat feature for that as well. My colleague Jeff Plowman from the department, who's our online and digital learning specialist, has graciously agreed to keep an eye on chat for us today. So he'll help get questions into the space. And then finally, I am recording this with the hope that we'll be able to share it in the near future so that others can access this content. So some introductions. First of all, we're so lucky that we have some experienced online teachers joining us today, or one today and a couple on Tuesday. Michael's a high school art instructor. And I think I've heard online instructors say that certainly in learning and teaching in COVID-19 is not the same thing as online learning, and there are also some best practices coming out of that space that I think are really applicable to this distance learning unfamiliar time. So, Michael, would you like to say anything about your background and who you are, what you do?
Yeah, so I graduated from Minnesota State Mankato and just randomly kind of stumbled into an online full-time job in Utah at what happened to be one of the better kind of online schools in the nation. And um, then basically since then, I've been working online at some level my whole career. And I I feel for everyone that's going through this. I know it's a challenge to go from like zero to hero, but I'm excited to be of assistance at some level and hopefully find some ways that I can help you focus on what's important.
Thanks for being here, Michael. And if and this is broadly a webinar for any arts teachers. Our online teachers joining us are specifically visual art teachers, but I think a lot of the fundamentals and even some of the concepts that Michael's able to share can be adapted for other arts areas as well. I have a resource list that I can share with y'all at the end that points you in the direction of a few places for resources for various arts areas. So just a little bit about what the objectives of this webinar are. Like Michael said, like we know things are happening really fast right now. Distance learning came at us fast, and regardless of what our life situation is, it probably doesn't feel normal. And I think as educators, there are a gazillion resource lists out there, social media examples, emails, and possibilities, and that those might feel overwhelming. So this webinar is not really focused on, say, tools or sites that you might be able to use in lessons. It's really more about focusing on some fundamental guiding principles to that are meant to help educators make decisions and prioritize and hopefully kind of clear out some of the noise that I think is around many of us right now. And like Chico Hamilton, this jazz musician says, we know so much in the arts that the fundamentals are key to build off of for great things. So uh, That said, the idea here is that we're going to consider three fundamentals for distance learning. This isn't the be all and end all, but for our time together today, we're organized around three things. One is clarity, the second is relationships, and the third is individualized support. Um, and hopefully you'll have a chance to make connections with your own and identify some next steps for your work. The fundamentals in here are based on best practices, both honestly and teaching and learning in general, in the arts and broadly. What we know works for students, regardless of the situation for their learning, and then also online learning. Again, like I said before, best practices that come out of online learning experts as well. Um, So just a quick note about equity and COVID-19 is really magnifying inequities that have been present, sometimes that are overlooked. But just as you're thinking about these fundamentals, also try to think of them as grounded in our work towards equity. I think in all this, we need to continuously try to think about how learners are receiving and perceiving and able to take what we're asking them to do in the variety of life situations that our students are finding themselves in right now. Remembering that equity doesn't mean equal, right? And so just like in the classroom, different students are going to need different supports, and we'll that'll be sort of a running theme for this hour. But just want to first fundamental, clarity. Clarity is super important, just like in the classroom. And I'm sure educators, you have already realized that you are not recreating your classroom experience online. And that you're probably working very, very hard, and that it's not going to feel perfect, probably no matter what. But you can still accomplish quite a bit. Kiddos can still be learning. So I think the first suggestion that I've been hearing and that we would have in anyway is to focus on core learning objectives and standards for your kids. And within that, how will you know what students are learning? In this setting, really beginning with the end in mind is so important than ever, so that you know what you're asking kids to do and why, and they know what they're working on and why. Finding ways to assess student learning is also really important. I know maybe at this point there might be some one-way instruction and activities going out. Over time, though, how can we find ways to see what kids are learning so that we can give them feedback so they can keep going? And I think having those core learning objectives foundation then allows us as educators to be flexible with the curriculum. So if you have a clear idea of what kids need to be learning and what that learning will look like, then the details of the curriculum, like how they're showing their learning, could be different. For example, maybe in an art classroom, you would always do a ceramics unit. And ceramics might not be possible in this case, but if it's about the core learning is really about showing the creation of an original artwork that has details that support both form and function. What other materials might kids be using to do that? Ceramics clay might not be available, but perhaps found objects or alternatives to something that you could mold could be a possibility. I'll pause there. Michael, did you want to jump in with anything by chance on that?
I mean, I think that there's plenty of information out there about like specific, other art teachers, what they're doing and stuff like that, that can be helpful. If you look on, different places that you can find general information about like projects. I know like you've seen like the found object, like color wheel and stuff like that. But I one I love that's really simple and don't need any supplies is like a Andy Goldsworthy study where you look at Andy Goldsworthy earth art and then the kids can go outside in their backyard and move some rocks or sticks or if they want to go on a hike or get them outside, which is probably just getting fresh air is important. But that's a lesson I always love that I've kind of been implementing for that kind of a thing.
Oh, I love that. I love that idea. Yeah. Might be an opportunity to do something new or look at new artists. Um, I think this idea of clarity and really having goals at the center is really important for us as adults as well. I think help it can help us keep perspective. And so, like, if you could only achieve one or two things during this time, what would it be? We want our kiddos to keep learning in the arts, right? But is another thing that's really important right now consistency for kids, or really embedding social emotional learning they're doing. Is creation as a way to process and document and reflect these times really important to you? Do you really need to be helping kids build portfolios for college? Whatever those one or two things are that you can't let go of for right now that can help you focus. Hang on to those and keep them at the center. Um, so another aspect of this clarity, as soon as the core learning objectives and your key goals are clear for you, keep it simple and successful is a suggestion that I think comes from Michael Walker Alvedina. And really don't pile too much on yourself or your students. This is a time where we need to take care of ourselves, and all sorts of emotional and mental health things coming up for lots of people and students. So try to keep the learning asks simple and clear and provide opportunities for being successful. And this is keep it simple both for you and for your students. So for you, like it's probably not a time, you probably found this already, like it's not a time to try to build an entire online course. Or it might not be a time to try to learn how to edit videos if that's something you've never done before. There's lots of content out there that's available online. So if you can find pre-made videos and content, you might find that leveraging that will give you more time to focus on building relationships and keeping those relationships with kids, as well as providing individualized support and feedback to your students. And also, you might be finding already that you can revise and retool lessons and assessments that you would have had in the classroom. And so if you're looking at what you already have planned, how can you revise and retool those? Kids, that idea of simplicity, again, goes back to being grounded in what the most important learning is. You might be able to bundle standards into one project. And if that's happening, awesome. One tip that I hear again and again is to be sure to scaffold. So break up a large project into the smaller chunks that will be the steps towards success for a student. Like if the project is to write an essay, an analysis of artwork, what is the first sort of, so maybe they need to select a piece of artwork and then outline what they'll do, et cetera, and stage it out with a schedule perhaps for each day. Routines and consistency will help with that feeling of manageability, I think. And then as much as possible, celebrate those successes, both the small and the large successes. I think one final point with clarity is then once you've planned it all, the communicating clearly and in multiple ways is so important. Um, Both being clear about expectations for a given day and the big picture expectations. And educators, I'm sure, are already finding that that's um, really important to the situation. Again, scaffolding out what the steps are for projects is really important, and in communicating in ways I think is key as well. I think I've heard from educators that they've poured a lot of energy into a long written description of what the assignment is, and that can help some, and some students, as you know, are probably going to need additional support to be sure that they know what's being asked of them and what success is going to look like. So it might need a video call or a phone call or a text message to help them understand what's needed. All right, I'm going to pause there. There was a lot. Michael, do you have any additional sort of insights, tips, what have you around clarity in your work as an online teacher?
One thing I found, and I've played with it a lot, is not limiting the amount of assignments is really important. So and then having the same submission process for students so that they can really figure it out that first time and hold them to it. So like if they're like, oh, but can I just text it to this, or can I email it, or and just like saying, hey, let's just work through this together, and sitting down and basically like working with them over the phone on how to turn it in. That simplifies your life a lot if you don't have emails and all this different work, the artwork kind of or creations coming in from different places. Now you can work with, a couple students if you know that there's students that really do need that help. But if students are just being lazy and they don't want to, document go through the actual process, I would suggest really kind of holding them accountable for actually doing that. It's something that can really help you out if you have a lot of students. Um, but really keeping things in weekly blocks, I think, is really helpful. So try not to do multi-week projects because you lose students that first week, but 1 week project for the overarching thing. And then maybe, if you need to do attendance or things like that, you could do like a smaller daily thing. But yeah, it just will depend on what your kind of specific thing is. But students will spend a lot of time, and it's actually kind of nice in the visual arts because students can sit down and work like a studio 3 hours at a time, 4 hours at a time on this specific project where they don't have to have that bell ring and have them leave and then have to come back.
Yeah, you're making me think about how even learning to be an online or distance learning student is maybe part of the learning right now. And still, even if things have been going for a few weeks, it might take a while for everybody to settle into the routines. Jeff, did you have anything you wanted to add around this idea of clarity in the distance learning?
No, nothing additional. I just think, like reinforcing what you said about, keeping it simple and finding success, I think is, super important right now. Try not to overthink it. Try not to do things that are too complex.
One other thing I did think of was if you can somehow grab example pieces that you could document a photo of and include in the instructions, that really helps students get an idea of like, oh, that's what those words mean. That's what the person's looking for. Because in your classroom, you'd have those examples, but if you can have a picture of that, that helps students so much see kind of, oh, this is the direction we're supposed to go in. Or if you could make an example piece if you can't grab one, even if it's just something really short and kind of simplified, um, that's really key to having students produce higher quality work um, because they see where you're actually looking at, what you're going for.
Great point. And whether the educator makes that, the teacher makes that, or maybe it's found online.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Okay, let's try this. Your turn, everybody that's joined us. What big goals do you have for learning and for your students right now? You can feel free to unmute yourself or type it into the chat. Is there something that you really want? This is for everybody that's joined us. Is there something you really want your kids to be able to know and do?
Hi, guys.
Hi,
I can share.
thanks.
My name is Nikon, and I teach elementary at Hassan Elementary in Rogers. I think, luckily, I listened to a lot of people from other countries who are a little bit ahead of us, and they said simplify and make it sustainable. And so, what I've been doing is careers in art, and I give them an assignment for the whole week. I'm also trying to give them the same assignment, K5, so that they can work as siblings and collaboratively if they would like. And it's going well, and it continues to get better every week, I would say. But I'm still running about 50% turn-in rate. So a goal for myself is to try to just explore that and figure out if this is just a learning curve or if there is a different way that I can encourage kids to be responsive to my class.
Yes, I have heard. I love that idea that you're kind of learning already from folks in other countries, and I've heard that that's. I wonder if it's especially at the elementary level right now that there's. Yeah, I see a head nodding. um, it's challenging, I think, to at this point. Um, Everybody's probably still figuring out what's expected and how to manage it. Right? I think we'll have to talk in a little bit more detail about those structures for the individualized connections. As an art teacher, are you able to collaborate with the classroom teachers?
Sure, I have 25 of them.
I know.
And 750 students. And I think that's the grace that I have to give myself is a couple of things. I feel like connection is really number one for me right now because I feel like that's really what my students are craving, as well as just knowing that everybody's in a different situation in a different boat and giving grace to that as well. You know, I might be last on the list and that's okay right now.
Yep. Yep. Thank you for sharing. Would anybody else like to share what they're thinking about priorities during this time? So important about connections with kiddos. I see it with my own son. Really misses the being able to be there physically. All right. Well, we will keep going. Feel free to pop in as you have ideas about the conversation. Um, so, and there we go. So the next fundamental, relationships. Really, as Nick was just saying, kids are really craving connections. We know that they're so important in the classroom. They're still really important. We have I'm sure everybody in this conversation right now has been finding that social emotional learning and mental health needs are so critical and coming up in ways that and with different kids that we may not even expected. Um, I'm hearing again and again that finding ways to set up regular check-ins and two-way communication opportunities is really important over time. Again, giving yourself grace as this gets ramped up. I think intentionality is going to be really key here. So, relationship building and maintenance can't happen by accident, especially in this situation. So, I think being able to carve out time to plan for this as a component of work during COVID-19 is just really critical. And if maybe something gets less attention for a while so that so that you're able to make connections and check in, that's okay. Now this may be something that happens over time, but depending on what sort of distance learning options are available to you, and how much online is happening or not. One aspect of relationships might be helping students connect with each other meaningfully, whether as a whole group or small groups or pairs. Again, this might be happening over time. It might not happen immediately. But we know that, especially in the arts, an important aspect of learning when we're all together is that opportunity to give and get feedback on work in progress. And so just putting that out there, the idea of how can at some point kids give each other feedback and share their work in meaningful ways, even at a couple points over the next month or so, if this gets extended. Possibly exploring ways for sharing work and giving feedback that don't rely on synchronous learning. So maybe posting something in a Google Doc or sharing a file for feedback with another student. If there's even possibly if this is an analog situation for you with packets, finding a way to share some kids' work every week so that other students can give them some supportive feedback. I think clarity is key here as well, right? If this is an important part of learning, then being clear about what the feedback is for and what the process is for that is going to be so helpful for kids. So you might use something like Harvard Project Zero's artful thinking strategy as a structure for prompting that feedback that kids might give to each other. Okay, I'm gonna pause there, and see if Michael has anything that you wanted to add to that idea of relationship building.
Yeah, I think there's a lot there, and there's a lot that I played with in regards to like finding success with students. And one thing I would really suggest is printing out like a spreadsheet of your rosters just so you can track your relationships like you would. You wouldn't really necessarily do that in a traditional classroom because it just kind of happens. They come into your classroom and you're building those relationships and you see each class. But I'm very like literally I have a spreadsheet with all my students, and then I like basically color code each week in regards to how I reached out to them, and if I heard back from them, that two-way communication. And knowing that it depends on what age range you have. If you have high schoolers or younger students, maybe you're tracking, if they really text message works really well for the older kids, but maybe it's reaching out to the parents even via text and just keeping everyone informed. Because I think that just being really intentional, almost like a detective, I always think of it like you're a detective who's trying to track down and build relationships with kids. and they're usually really receptive if you hear back from them. And I think just being patient and figuring out ways that you can find success a lot of times just comes with continuing to try different things. Um, then also in regards to like them building relationships with each other, I think that's going to be a struggle. But you can give them opportunities. Like I have an art club kind of a thing where we basically get together and they can come and it's totally up to them. But that's a nice chance to kind of have them at least feel like they could be a part of something, whether they choose to or they don't. Um, and then having discussions. So sometimes maybe I'd like to think of it like rather than them really building these relationships together, which is a kind of a challenge online, to be honest. They could get a relationship with, maybe an artist that you personally appreciate over time. So they could, through their digital connection, almost be connected to the artwork of this person and give feedback on that, kind of like looking at the Sistine Chapel for the first time, or like all these different kind of creative things. They can, I don't know, grow in their appreciation of the arts in general through this in a different way than maybe they would be able to once again in a traditional bricks and mortar setting. And just being diligent and knowing that you can do it. um, it's a little different, but especially because you probably have pretty good relationships at this point in the year with your students, they're really going to crave and be excited about getting to know you that much more through all this and be looking to you. How are you reacting to this? So, time in our life.
Thanks, Michael. Jeff, is there anything out of the chat, or did you want to add anything to relationships? I know that's a focus of your work. Um,
Yeah, hey there, can you hear me now?
yes, sir. Hi.
Okay. Um, yeah, I think I just wanted to draw attention to what Michael said about the intentionality that's required here. And this is something that I worked on this week. So there was a team of people in MDE that created a family engagement toolkit, it's called. It's posted on our COVID-19 webpage, and I'll drop that in chat in a minute. But one of the things, well, a couple of the things that we talked about there in terms of relationship is prioritizing those connections, first of all, and making sure that, instead of like going back and connecting with the kids that we always hear from, because that can kind of be a tendency, right? Is to like connect with the kids that are easy to connect to, is really paying attention to who hasn't been connected with. And maybe not just by yourself as an art specialist, but connect to the other specialists, connect to the classroom teachers and say, hey, who is a priority for you? And maybe, if they're not having success connecting with the classroom teacher, maybe they'll be more likely to connect with you as a specialist. So strategies like that are great. And yeah, being intentional and keeping track and communicating. One of the other things too is that because this situation is changing so fast, um, students and families that are okay one week may not be okay the next week. Like their family situations are changing so quickly. And that's one of the things that I'm hearing again and again, right? Like parents are getting laid off and people are getting sick that they know and things like this. So following up is also super important. But other than that, I think there was a question in the chat that Nick dropped in again. So she's wondering, and you may decide to, that you're going to address this later, Alina, but I just wanted to draw your attention to it. She says, what were the ways you are collecting art? I'm assuming she means like finished pieces, especially for students who are in the elementary.
Yeah. Nick, are you guys doing everything not online? Is there thinking about like how to collect physical artwork?
No, we do have access. All of our students have access to a device, which is
Okay.
wonderful. Our district was able to provide that. So right now we're using Seesaw K2 and then Flipgrid. I'm experimenting with K or 3.5. And I
Yeah.
really like Flipgrid and Seesaw, but I just was wondering if there were other people that have some tips and tricks. I think those two platforms allow for some relationship, as you guys are talking about. So that's really why I like those. But if there was other suggestions, I'd like to hear them.
So this is Jeff. I'm wondering, like Flipgrid. I just learned Flipgrid during the COVID crisis myself because I wanted to collect reflections in an easy way from some of the ed tech community. And it reminded me, I used to use VoiceThread a lot when I was a classroom teacher. And so it kind of reminded me of that, where it's like really easy to put up videos around a topic that you select, right? So I'm wondering, Nick, if that's kind of how you're using Flipgrid. Are you having students like present their piece um, via video, or is that, something you might consider?
Yeah, that's what they're doing right now. I've invited 3 through 5 to all participate in the same Flipgrid, new subject every week. But I think what's nice about it is they get to see, possibly 300 other kids' artwork. It hasn't been that yet, but many. And they're saying their name, classroom, and then explaining their art. So I only give them 45 seconds so that it's not overwhelming to me. And it's been going okay. Like I said, I was just interested of other platforms that people are using.
That sounds great. That's really a neat way to wrap in some of the background thinking of what they're doing in addition to seeing the artwork. I know I think a lot of places are also using Google Classroom as a way to submit. Um, if anybody else has things that they have been using and can share, you can throw that in the chat as well. Um, so I I did want to throw this opportunity out here to think about at least how could you support meaningful peer-to-peer feedback from a distance? And maybe that is leveraging something like Flipgrid um, and even Seesaw. Keep going so that we can make sure and get through the last fundamental, which is very much building off of the relationships fundamental, individualized support. And I think they're so connected. Michael and Jeff really went there immediately, that the idea of needing to sort of be very intentional about the individual connections that are happening. I just wanted to echo what Jeff said, that it's so important to recognize that students' needs are going to be changing over time, and the same ones that you're probably already finding the same kids that needed support in the classroom might not be the same ones that are needing a lot of support now during distance learning, and that will likely continue to shift. So the picture of who's needing support will shift over time, and so way to also over time sort of check in and find that out. And maybe that is again a combination of tracking your connections with kids, as well as hopefully increasingly coordination between all the educators that are working with kids, so that you can keep a picture of the state of each kiddo as much as possible. And also on the flip side of that, I've heard from a few people that there are some kids that are surprising them as far as they may not have been the standout student in the classroom, the physical classroom, but they're really thriving in a distance learning environment. So you might find that as well. I appreciate that you literally have a system for tracking relationships for with each kid, because that's data that will be something you can go back to and make decisions off of. Um, I think a combination of support and relationships is finding ways to provide individualized feedback. That's something that in an arts classroom happens regularly, and sort of naturally in many cases. It is yet another thing that will probably require more intentionality and maybe a different system for providing individualized feedback. But I've heard again and again that sort of personalized feedback to kids, it might not happen certainly every day, might not happen every week, but some sort of regular feedback on the work that they're doing, not only is going to help with relationships, but it's going to help them know where their successes are and where they need to grow and how they're doing in their learning. Um, on the slide there, I sort of boiled down something from Grant Wiggins. The big ideas for individualized feedback is to, connect it back to those goals that you had anyway, make it real, tangible, and actionable, and usable by the students, um, timely as much as possible, of course, understanding that the situation that we're in not be something that's possible, but maybe really the word is regular, some sort of consistent schedule for that kids will know when they might be hearing from you. And I think maybe this idea here has been coming up throughout, but really the idea that for clarity and for relationships and for individualized support, planning for your time as an adult is and the teacher is so, and that the way you're dividing up your time, you probably find is different from what it looks like when you're actually teaching in school. Like you don't have a prep probably right now, that sort of thing, but some sort of regular schedule where you've built in time in some way for these things, like of course planning the assignments, but also building in a schedule and a process for communicating with kids and with families, and feedback time for kiddos. Uh, if that's not scheduled in, it because it's requires more intentionality, it might be more scattered. So if over time you can build a schedule, it'll help you be regular with those key parts of the distance learning. And also creating boundaries, I think, is a part of that. I've heard from online educators that if you let it, distance learning can kind of take over your life, because it's, especially if you're doing this part of, at least part of it online, messages come in at all hours potentially. And so if you can set a sort of a timeline for when kids not only can know they can reach out to you, but a timeline within which they know they'll hear back from you. So if they send you a message, it might be they'll hear back from you within 24 hours or something like that, just so that they don't, so that everybody can manage their expectations around communication and what's realistic, um, to as far as the time period. Many people I know are holding office hours as an opportunity for kids and families to connect with teachers. And again, in addition to holding office, having a system so that you have data around what kids are connecting with at least somebody at the school and who isn't, and then being able to tier the support and follow up with kids in different communication routes. Oh, so Jeff, I see, I'm gonna actually see if you wanted to jump in and build off of that, because I see you put something in chat.
I can't keep myself out of this conversation.
Yeah, man, I'm so glad you're in it.
It's yeah. I mean, it's interesting. Like one of my friends, who is a tech integration coach at Edina, we were part of a conversation this morning over Twitter, but he said, if he would recommend folks focus on one thing, it's the feedback loops right now, right? So if that is anything that we can take away from this, is like the feedback loops and the importance of those feedback loops, especially now, are something that we can't undersell, I think. And I think, looking ahead to what might come out of all of this is just different ways to sort of look at the feedback that we give and how we connect with each learner. So I'm curious to hear from Michael actually about, thoughts on feedback and grades and how to do both of those things effectively as an online teacher.
Yeah, that's your whole day goes and it looks a lot different. And that, I think, boundaries is really important for you to, especially if you have online students, to set, because it's easy to have your phone. And that's literally, boundaries just means controlling where your phone is and what settings on your phone you have. Um, so like turning your phone off, or, basically turning it on silent so you don't even think about it for these periods of time. Now that doesn't mean your workday, like, in regards to how you schedule things, in regards to having an hour at night that maybe you're working on something because that's kind of what you like to do, or, you got to fluctuate that with your own personal style. But the big thing with feedback, a couple takeaways that I would suggest is, number one, if you have an assignment that's a big project and you have to give a lot of feedback, rather than like typing the same thing over and over again, you can just create a document that basically you have your projects and the feedback that you'd give a student who did everything right. And then you can personalize it by putting their name in there. I think it's really important to put their name in the feedback so they feel like it's about them, and it's not just kind of broad like strokes. So usually what I'll do is I'll have that document that has the feedback that actually continues the learning for the project that I made, where I'm referencing different points. So when they read the feedback, they think back to like what they learned. But then I also personalize it with one individualized sentence or something like that. So that feedback document's something that I've really enjoyed using. And then also realizing that as students are turning in, especially creative projects in the fine arts, they have this personal connection to it. And they're searching for feedback when they turn it in. So just giving them a grade is kind of like disappointing, I think, in some level, because they put their personal touch on this thing that they made. So giving them back something to say, noticing the different details or something that is specific about their work can be really, I think, a good relationship builder and a really important piece of that relationship. I'll even ask students questions and feedback and say, email me about it, because that again is a way to not have it be like where I'm reaching out to them, in one specific way. It's just another way that I can say, hey, I really noticed this detail. What's the meaning behind that? And then students will email me and say, oh, this, and this. And then it continues that conversation, where that's a more natural thing that would happen in your classroom. So something to consider there in regards to feedback. And the voice thing that she mentioned is kind of cool. So you'll hear from students in a different way than maybe you would in your traditional classroom. Quieter students, sometimes online, they are very comfortable because they're not in the social setting that is kind of the traditional school setting. So you'll be surprised how you get to know them, and I think encouraging them in those moments when they're kind of sharing because they feel comfortable can really do wonderful things for their development as individuals.
It's so there's a lot in there. That's so interesting that you kind of make a like a list of feedback that's basically tied back to your rubric or your checklist or whatever. Is that what you?
Yep. Yeah. So like literally I'll have like a document that kind of like is like, well, if the student does this, here's what the feedback would be. And then I'll personalize it to exactly what they make. And then if the student like doesn't follow these rubric kind of guidelines, here's the feedback I make. Now, especially let's say you had like 100 students on in one specific class doing this project, that can really save you time in regards to even typing like 30 words just to control copy, control paste that over, and then personalize it so the students feel like they're, really getting this amazing amount of personal attention, which you are giving them. It's just information that's kind of like you followed the project guidelines. Let's continue learning through that.
Thank you. Have about 5 minutes left with each other. So at this point, I would like to open it up. If you want to share other ideas or strategies that you've developed already for organizing your time, um, or scaffolding things for kids, feel free to share that. Or if you have questions, for any of us, this would be a great time for those as well. And as
Alina,
I think about elementary, different beast in the situation, I think there's a lot less sort of examples of what that looks like for a first grader versus a middle schooler or a high schooler. So anybody that's teaching elementary arts right now is on the front lines of figuring a lot of things out, and thank you so much.
One thing I would actually suggest in with that is sometimes if you bring it into like the family, like almost like a project that the whole family could do together, and then you specifically hope that the student will do it. Um, but that could be a way that you can maybe have it as like a contest, like see in your family who can make the best paper airplane, and here's some tutorials that kind of talk about aerogami. It's called aerogami, and it's like folding paper to create cool paper airplanes. And then it ties them in, and then maybe the older brother, or you got these different relationships. But it is. I'm curious to see how that goes, and I feel for you guys, as it seems like there's so much more out of the student's control at that age.
one thing, this is Jeff. One thing I was wondering about too, kind of related to the family challenge, and this is something we've actually tried to engage our uh, middle school and high school kids in with not a lot of success, but maybe if they were younger, it would work. But just doing some like community art kind of around COVID, like some sidewalk art, some, poetry, some things like that in the neighborhood. I wonder if people are kind of doing that. And I know that can be overdone too, like if everybody kind of does it and it makes assumptions as well potentially about how people are going to hear that. So just wondering if people are doing that, how that's gone.
I specifically about that sort of thing, in connection with schools, but I'm sure it's something that could be happening. I know I heard recently about some one place was having, one teacher was having kids sort of do a journaling, but in a visual way. I've heard in some cases in kids to develop songs of kind of document time. So there's a, I'm sure a gazillion things that are that teachers are going to be coming up with for to sort of make this very very teachable moment something that we can bring into the arts as well. Yeah, Nick's saying there's so many good ideas in social media. Yeah. Well, I can certainly stick around, but want to be sure that we wrap up when we said we would. Glad to take more questions. I will give you my email address in a second. But here's a bit.ly to not long resource list, but it includes links in case you don't have them to the Purpose Center, where all of their art specialists are developing um, resources over time. And so that's a great one to check out. And actually, Jeff, I was going to add the family engagement toolkit to that. I just didn't get around to it. So I'll stick it in there also right after this, because I think that's a great resource to have as well. This is my feel free to reach out if you have any questions or suggestions, especially as far as um, content for future webinars. Would love to hear what you think, what resources you would like to see. So please don't hesitate to reach out. With that, I would just like to say thank you to Michael again for being here and sharing some of your insight and expertise. I really really appreciate it. And Jeff, you as well. Thank you for sharing your expertise with everybody. And oh, Jeff, did you want to? I've not quite followed what's going on in the chat. Do you want to sum up what's been
Oh
what?
yeah, I just Nick said Instagram was great to find, some of these ideas. And I just asked her for examples of what some of the good accounts would be that she recommends, and she dropped some in there, which is awesome. So thanks for that.
Thank you very much. And with that, everybody, have a wonderful rest of your Friday. Restful and restorative weekend, I hope. Take care. Please don't hesitate to reach out.